This is Swarfcast. I'm Noah Graff. I'm very honored to be with Josh Hacko, fourth generation watchmaker and technical director of NH Micro and Nicholas Hacko Watchmaker. Welcome to the show, Josh.
Hey, Noah. Nice to see you. Nice to talk to you.
Thank you. I met Josh on LinkedIn, and he is a very good friend of Josh Shapiro, another watchmaker who I had the pleasure of interviewing a few months ago. Was one of my favorite interviews and one of the most popular interviews we've had. So when I met Josh, I thought, oh, this would be a great interview. So let's break into this. Tell me about your two companies real quick. Give me just to give some context about what you do.
Thanks for the intro, Noah. That's it's great to meet you and great to be on the podcast. For those,
and you have a podcast yourself.
Yeah, I do have a podcast myself. Maybe we can get into that a bit later. But it's it's a fun podcast.
But you should plug yourself.
Yeah, well, yeah. It's I feel so strange about plugging myself on that podcast. It's a podcast Adam Demuth and I run. Adam is a toolmaker by trade and a precision machining job shop sort of entrepreneur, and he's based in Ohio and I'm based in Australia on the other end of the world, and we somehow make a podcast work between the time zones, and we just talk about precision machining and all that sort of stuff. But yeah, I feel very strange plugging myself.
But I don't understand why do you feel bad about plugging your podcast? That's what I'm trying to get on other shows to plug my podcast. This is the way to grow. So I think there's no shame in that. And people want to know where they can find you. So yeah,
that's true.
Plug away.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well,
so tell me more.
Well, my name is Josh Hacko, and I'm the technical director. Although it's a very nebulous, sort of ambiguous term. I'm the technical director of two sister companies. One's called NH Micro, the other's Nicholas Hacko Watchmaker, and they both operate outside of the same physical facility, same workshop, same staff, same knowledge base, and both.
And where are you talking to me from?
I'm based in Sydney, Australia, and our company is on the northern beaches of Sydney, so we're 500 meters or so away from the beach. Curl Beach is the closest beach, and it's a lovely spot in the world. Although I have to say, every city is about the same. Sydney is about the same as something like Los Angeles. It's just a big sprawl. So the northern beaches is a little tucked away, maybe bubble is probably the best way to describe it. Lovely spot in the world.
Okay. So tell me again. Tell me what. Just a brief overview of each company.
Yeah. Well, we're birthed from watchmaking. My father is a third generation watchmaker, and sort of by proxy, being his son makes me a fourth generation
incredible
watchmaker. It feels a bit strange to say as well. I did do some vocational training under him as a watchmaker, but it was so limited, and I only did about 2 or 3 years during high school. My real qualification doesn't exist. I'm neither machinist nor engineer nor watchmaker. I just make stuff, and I might exhibit some characteristics of all those different trades. I actually love to refer to myself as just a lowly tradesman, because in the grand scheme of things, and in the hierarchy of talent, that's all I am. I just make small things and tried my best to do it. And so the companies
Is
that
there
I'm
something? Is there such thing as a non-lowly tradesman?
well, maybe that's part
Uh,
of the title as well. Yeah, a
a
non-lowly
high
tradesman. But
tradesman?
well, funny you should say that. I mean, some trades do consider themselves more highly skilled than others, and I do think that there is it's a misnomer. It doesn't really exist because you can go down rabbit holes in any single trade. If you're a plumber, you can be a very specific type of
Oh,
plumber, or if
tough
you're
job.
it's a tough job. Every job is a tough
I know.
job if you apply yourself.
It's true. Even if you're a bricklayer, I suppose there's a good way to do it and a lousy way to do it.
This is so tangential, Noah, and I'm sorry to take it this way, but about 2 years ago, I was building a granny flat. A granny flat's like a secondary dwelling on a sort of block of land. So it's in my parents' backyard, and when I say I was building it, I was laboring on the site. So we had actual real life tradesmen come on site, and I was just lugging dirt around from one side, or lugging bricks, or lugging building material. Um, and I did that for about 6 months, sort of while I was working, which in retrospect, I have no idea how it worked out time wise. But I realized on that building site that every single trade that you're a part of, every single trade gives an opportunity for a person to apply themselves in whichever level they want to apply it. We saw bad tradesmen on site that were just doing it for the coin. They came on site and wanted to check in, check out. And then we saw amazing tradesmen that were doing timber framing or roofing or bricklaying, as we just mentioned, and they were masters of their trade. They knew every single thing. They knew how to place that brick so it had the lowest impact on their sort of physical movement and the highest impact on quality. And you could just tell by observing that these guys were top level. And so that's why I think every trade is maybe equally lowly or equally high, but I never suppose that what I do is in any way better than an extremely I guess talented bricklayer would observe.
See, it makes me think kind of like playing instruments, right? Like I've heard people say playing a trumpet is quote unquote harder than playing the guitar. But if you want to be at the top of your game of guitar and the
Exactly.
top of your game of
Yes.
trumpet, um, it can take just as much effort and practice to do that, I suppose.
Absolutely. Yep. And that's, again, I'll take this tangential again. Please stop me if you don't like these tangential comments. But I've been playing guitar for about 15 years, and I love playing guitar. And I've definitely reached some plateaus in my journey. And then I start playing another genre of music, and I learn more. But recently, about 3 or 4 years ago, I started playing a quintessential sort of American country instrument called the pedal steel guitar, which is some of you might sort of know it as the SpongeBob sound, or maybe that sort of whiny country music sound. It's got a very specific sonic signature. Anyway, I sat down and I thought that all my skills from playing one type of guitar would translate to the other. And my goodness, tell you what, there's nothing more humbling than learning a new skill, in this case, an instrument. And in my actual job, what I get paid for, what I get salaried for, it feels like that every single day. I'm learning something new and learning a new method maybe, or a new process, and I'm constantly humbled. And that teaches you never to be arrogant, or try to never be arrogant about anything. I don't know if you've heard of the phenomenon called the Dunning-Kruger effect. Have you heard that before?
I have heard of it. I feel like I've heard of it recently and now, but I can't remember what it is.
Let me give you like a 2-second explainer, because the Dunning-Kruger effect describes my life so perfectly. Basically, when you start a new skill, you have an elevated sense of self confidence. you often think that you're far better at the skill than you actually are. And that happens right at the sort of start of your skill journey. And so your confidence is super high and your experience is super, super low. And what happens very quickly, incredibly quickly, within a day, within a moment even sometimes, is that you realize that you're actually not very good. So going into tasks, it takes a lot of forethought to analyze pre-analyze the situation and say, well, you know what? There's a very low chance that I'm actually naturally gifted at this task. There's an extremely high chance that I'm total dirt at this task, and I'll have to learn and sort of extrapolate my skills and practice them. And the second part of the Dunning-Kruger effect is the stage that follows this sort of catastrophic clash or catastrophic fall of self-confidence.
I mean, part of it is it's like beginner's luck, maybe, right? Or you feel like you have beginner's luck.
Yeah, you feel like you have beginner's luck, exactly. But after you sort of lose that self-confidence, it takes a very long time, and it's a gentle, slow slope. And you have this like moment of self-realization where you say, "Oh, actually, you know what? I've been humbled. I have to approach this with fresh sets of eyes and slowly regain my confidence as my experience." And it tracks very linearly with your experience. So your confidence grows only as quickly as you can apply time into your task. And in machining specifically, I mean, that's my day to day. I know we talked about instruments and building and trades and all the rest, but in machining, I see that every single day.
Right.
Myself,
so you get that's where others. I thought we were going to segue into it too. So for instance, maybe you know how to run a Citizen and then a Citizen Swiss machine, and then you go to like a vertical lathe and you better like get your brain together and go,
yep.
Okay, I'm going in, and this is, don't pretend people might say, oh, it's just a single spindle lathe. Maybe it's easier, but go into it and like have a fresh state of mind. Is that what you're getting at?
Absolutely. So like some people call that ego death. Some people call that sort of like a recalibration of ego. But that's the easiest way in my experience. And I've only been in this trade for like 8 years, so I'm extremely green.
Oh wow,
super fresh.
How old are you?
I just turned 26 2 days ago.
So go on. Let's you got these two companies. They both have machines, both some similar ones, various types of CNC machines. I think which one do you want to start with as far as the watches or the other one? Is the other one a job shop?
Yeah, we can start with the watches, and the story naturally progresses into the second company, NH Micro. So
okay, so your great grandfather was a watchmaker, and he was in Yugoslavia.
Yep, in former Yugoslavia. Yep. Mihailo was his name, and he was a watchmaker trained to repair watches for sort of mass commodity level mechanical wristwatches. And that was a trade in the same way that bricklaying and gyprocking and all those other trades were. So he went to trade school.
We're talking like the 1800s.
Maybe not that early. So he started. I want to say 1946.
When you say that, I'm thinking in the 40s, 30s. I think watches would be sort of a higher. I mean, when I was thinking 1800s, I was thinking, whoa, watches, that's like the equivalent of computers way back in the day, like it's a higher trade to me and more elegant, say, than a bricklayer. No offense to bricklayers.
No. I mean, I think that's what watchmaking companies nowadays want to create an image of. That's probably where the mass media comes
It
in and
better be
says,
because
well,
you're gonna pay that much. So I mean,
yeah, there's a definite concerted marketing effort to elevate the history and the heritage of watchmaking, which is in many cases true. But for my great grandfather in former Yugoslavia, that was not the case. He was trained to repair watches as quickly as possible, in a very high quality. Nothing against the quality, but he was repairing watches that had only one purpose, which was to tell the time cheap. And in the same way that we have iPhones telling the time on every person's, in every person's pocket, but Apple Watches on every person's wrist, they're fairly commodity items. You can, purchase an Apple Watch every 2 years. The same can be said for mechanical wristwatches during that period. So they were very, very prolific, and his training came from really mass diagnosis and mass repair of these watches. And that's an incredible skill. That's something that's actually lost today, in the sense that the watch repair, and this is a whole nother facet of watchmaking, but watch repair
I
is,
met a watch repair guy one time who called about a machine, and it's a pretty tight commodity.
yeah, absolutely. So people in the watch repair industry are the biggest resource, the human resource. The watchmakers sitting behind the benches are so valuable. And the companies in America and Switzerland and in Germany and Japan, they're starving for people. So if you want to get into the trade, young people, it's a perfect entry. You have, your choice of, you could move all the way across the world, in Australia, into the US, into Germany, and
If you
become
can
a
find
watch repair.
somebody to train you, yeah.
That's right. Yeah,
And
that's one big hurdle. So that's where the company started, but that progressed until the sort of early 90s, where my father was sort of displaced from his home country. He moved to Australia in 1994 due to the sort of disassembly of Yugoslavia, let's call it that. And
I see.
he
Was
he
he
was a
from
refugee.
Croatia, from Serbia, from where?
So he's mixed. He's truly Yugoslavian. My entire family is truly Yugoslavian. So he's half Croat, half Serb. My mum comes from the northern part of Serbia, where there's Hungarian influence. She's ethnically Ruthenian, which is like a ultra small, diaspora of Slavic people that have come from the north. And so it's truly a mix. And there was no place for them in a nationalistic environment anymore. When your identity is not A, B, or C, it's A, B, C, D, E, F, G in one word. You don't have a
Get the
place
heck
where,
out.
yeah, exactly. It's just A people or B people. And anyway, that's neither here nor there. They,
So your dad came, and
uh-huh.
then did he come with his father as well, or no?
No. So he was the first generation to emigrate into Australia. He had some sort of slightly more distant family that was already here in a previous wave of emigration, sort of post-World War immigration. But his father, so my dad's dad,
You're not
and the rest of
Jewish,
that
are you?
family. On my mother's side, yes. So it's my mum's mum is Jewish, but not practicing Jewish. So we're
No.
completely. It's funny. Like I get asked that because I've got curly hair and fair skin
But
and
if
blue
you were in
eyes. But
Germany, if you were in Germany in the 1940s, they would have taken you to a concentration camp.
for sure, just by virtue of me being non-German, I'm sure.
That's the qualification for getting into Israel. If Hitler would have killed you, then you're
Wow.
Jewish enough to go to Israel, or at least that traditionally was. Your dad came to Yugoslavia. He went and got another watchmaking company going, continued the family business. Is that how it happened?
That's about what's happened in the last 20, 30 years. But obviously, that's gone through many journeys. He started off doing watch repair and then watch buying and selling, so secondhand dealing of high grade Swiss mechanical watches, and fundamentally that's actually our core business. So if you look at the sort of P&L statement, that's where we've
Selling
spent.
used watches.
That's right. That's right. So we've done
Ah,
that
so
for the
you're a
longest
treasure
time.
hunter like me.
Yeah, exactly. So, although that's not my specific role, our company is definitely quite strong in what we do there. And in 2000, so maybe I'll sort of preface the start of the watchmaking company um, with the caveat that we were always in watch repair. Watch repair is the foundation of all of our businesses. So buying and selling, for example, hinges on watch repair. It's sort of like being a mechanic and being able to sell some cars that you come across because you're able to repair them, because you're able to diagnose what's
Right.
wrong, and that's an
And do
incredibly
you have
important
watch
skill.
repair? You have that skill?
Well, I did do about two and maybe even 2.5 years under my dad, focusing on that. It's been about 7 years or 8 years since I've practiced it. It's definitely something you have to spend time on repeatedly. If I was to go back to the bench and do watch repair, I'd be hopeless, and that's the reality of practicing that skill. But in saying that, in our company, we've got watchmakers that do that full time, and we've allocated the role.
How do you
But
find how do you get the used watches?
well, we have a huge database of collectors and clients, and generally, watches get sold to us from collectors that want to dispose of their collections or upgrade their collections, or from people having unwanted gifts, and uh, sometimes we happen on collections of watches um, just by existing. So someone will search up watch dealer and then have a watch to sell, and then walk in off the street. So it's a bit sporadic, but we buy and sell about nearly 1,000 watches a year, and
Wow.
we do a lot of other
And how
stuff.
much do these watches cost? The ones that you buy and sell, what's the range?
In general, the range that we stick to. So watchmaking, again, this is such a big topic. Comes in these price tiers, right? So you can buy and sell watches that are $100. You can buy and sell watches that are $1,000, and then $10,000, and then $100,000, and $1,000,000. And each tier, logarithmically, you sort of reduce the volume. You could buy and sell 100,000 watches at $100 each, but your margin might be 5% or something. So our price range that we stick to is between about 3,000 or 4,000 to about 20,000 Australian dollars. So most of the watches are in that range. So between buying and selling watches, that's sort of what we did my father did for about 20 years. Watch repair was always a foundation of that. So 30% of all of the revenue for a very, very long time was in watch repair. So that's our own stock, but also customers that would come in and say, hey, I've got this Rolex. It's due for an overhaul. Are you able to service it? And we'd always say yes, or at least try to say yes. And then in 2011,
And that's why, and that's how you get, and that's how you find new customers too, because
absolutely, yeah,
they're coming in
absolutely.
for that.
That's there's a word for it. It's like customer entry point in the customer journey, or something like that. If I was more in tune with marketing, I'd probably know that better. But in 2011, everything changed, and this is sort of a
Okay.
foundational shifting point in our company history. Basically, large Swiss corporations, conglomerates like Richemont Group, Swatch Group, Rolex, they decided that they would start to monopolize the service industry for watchmaking. So they stopped the supply, they restricted the supply of spare parts to independent watchmakers. The equivalent of this is if you're a mechanic, and I think this is something that everyone can relate to. You go to a mechanic that's, your Ford dealership mechanic, or you've got your guy down the road that you've been dealing with for 30 years. It'd be like the guy down the road not being able to source spark plugs, windscreen wipers, tires, all the basic elements. And I'm not talking engine blocks. I'm talking the basic elements that you need to have in your stock arsenal to be able to repair and service high-grade Swiss mechanical watches. And that stopped in 2011. All the Swiss companies got together and said, you know what? We want to monopolize this. We want to introduce a new system. And they did this pretty much overnight. In Sydney, there were
So it was
watchmakers.
like a cartel.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a cartel. And it went to the Swiss courts. It went to international courts. In America, it's sort of that right to repair movement that has sort of bucked against that trend of the cartelization. And this killed our service and repair industry overnight. Within one day, basically, maybe a week, but it felt like a day, we were not able to continue that business. 30% of the revenue was completely wiped. And that was the birth of our watchmaking company. Because my dad, in his infinite sort of drive and determination, said, you know what, like these people, they don't want me to repair watches. Well, I'll prove it to them that I can repair watches. And the preface to that is that I was about 2011. I think I was maybe 13, 14 at that time. I think that's right. Yeah. And he said, my son, he's young. I'm going to send him to Switzerland. He's going to do your courses. He's going to spend 4 years. He'll even apprentice at Rolex or Richemont Group or Swatch Group. When he comes back to Australia and he sets up his own workshop, this is all hypothetical. When he sets up his own workshop,
Okay.
buys all the equipment, buys everything, will you, at that point, a genuine Swiss-trained watchmaker at that point, will you supply him spare parts? And the response from large Swiss corporations was, and this is pretty much, word for word, they said, no Australian watchmaker will ever be good enough to repair brand X watches. And
because you're Australian blood.
possibly the Australian blood, possibly just total bean counting nearsightedness, and
very nearsightedness.
That rubbed my dad the wrong way, and he said, "Well, screw you guys." And I think in much more colorful language than that, but he said, "Screw you guys. If you think that I can't repair a watch, I'm going to make a watch." And that's infinitely harder. Making a watch is, it's a completely different skill set. It's a completely different journey. And that was 2011. And here we are in 2023. It's been a long journey. And
but your dad knew watches so well that he had the balls to say, F you, I'm going to try it.
Pretty much. And honestly, we talked about the Dunning-Kruger effect. We didn't know what we didn't know. There were so many unknown unknowns at that point. In 2011, I didn't know what an end mill was. Heck, in 2016, when we started the manufacturing side of our journey, I didn't know what an end mill was. And so there was a massive, massive learning curve that if I had known in 2016, if I had known how tough this whole industry was going to be and how tough this journey would have been, I never would have started. So the Dunning-Kruger effect, in many ways, we talked about it so negatively at the start, but it actually allowed us to naively set forward this whole company into motion. And I'm not shy to talk about numbers. The numbers are pretty clear for us. It's a multi-million dollar effort to do what we've done, which is to make watches in Australia. The Swiss, in many different publications, in writing, but also there's some amazing industry talks. The Swiss describe making a new watch costs 1 million Swiss franc a year in development, in research, in execution. I can attest, after 11 years in the trade, that's an extremely accurate number. And if we didn't have that money to invest and to not take profits out of the company and to constantly reinvest, then this whole effort would have crumbled. So it's a testament to my dad, really. He's an incredible visionary when it comes to finding an opportunity, finding a gap in the market, let's say. But his main skill that he always says, at least he tries to always say, is it's a team effort. It's a constant team effort where your goal is only as achievable as how well you can assemble a team. And that's what his main priority has been over the last 12 years. It doesn't matter what I'm trying to say, and I'll say it much more simply. It doesn't matter how much money you have. If you don't have a team, that's it. You can go back to the drawing board. So I know I've talked a lot, but that's the rough genesis of our company. And in 2016, that's probably the next pivotal moment. Between 2011 and 2016, we produced about 700, maybe 800 watches that were not manufactured by us. We did the design.
How much do they cost? The ones that you produce?
So there's two distinct phases of our company. The first phase is where we designed, assembled, and adjusted the watch. We didn't do the manufacturing. Those watches cost about 2,000 Australian dollars, roughly.
And that was where you started out from when 2011. You guys said we're changing. When did you first come up with the new watch? The first generation.
Yeah, it's very organic. What happened? We didn't plan nearly anything. In 2016, the only thing we planned was the start of the journey. All we said was we have to start making things in Australia.
What happened between 11 and 16?
So between 2011 and 2016, we sourced all of our components from 11 or 12 international suppliers. So we had German components, Swiss components, Taiwanese, Chinese, Japanese components, all from around the world, from a bill of materials that we designed. And then we assembled those components and sold that watch. So nothing was made in Australia. And that watch was at that price point at $2,000 because we leveraged sort of a larger supply chain. And it was a very different type of watch as well. It was hitting a different market, and but it allowed us to sort of not flex the muscles in some like a peacocking way, but it allowed us to learn how do you build a brand, how do you start a company, and we'd already had a lot of administrative experience running companies, but nothing like a luxury goods watchmaking company. And in 2016, things started to change again because I was sort of coming out of, I was in my second year of university by that point, but I was trying to figure out what I was going to do with my life. And I was very hands-on, extremely sort of focused. I was building guitar amplifiers and doing woodworking and sort of trying to figure out.
It's in your blood.
Yeah, maybe it's in the blood. Yeah, it's definitely at the dinner table because whatever my mom fed me helped for sure, horizontally, but also in my hand skills. So we were sort of at a point where I was bustling and with energy and trying to help the company. And Dad said, well, okay, there's this young kid. Let's give him an opportunity. And he said, let's start manufacturing some things in Australia. And the overall goal was to make an Australian manufactured watch. It's, again, an extremely ambitious goal now in retrospect, but it started with that.
And that means doing all the mechanical parts,
yes.
The back end, or
yes.
the movement, I learned with Josh's podcast.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
So, and your dad, of course, knew watches like it was in his blood. So he had an idea of what that meant. Didn't know how hard it would be, but he knew what it meant.
Well, I can give you an example. I mean, he knew the ins and outs of a mechanical watch, of how to diagnose a fault, what works, in terms of design, what doesn't work, but we had very little idea of how to make things. So in 2016, our plan was to buy a watchmaking machine, a machine where you put material in one end and a watch comes out the other. That was our idea of manufacturing. And just
Does that
imagine.
exist?
No, it doesn't. Not even close. Nothing even close exists, and that was a learning experience for us. And we said, okay, we learned that very quickly, extremely quickly. What else are we going to learn? And since 2016, it's actually been all about learning. All about learning. We've never had a year where we haven't learned something.
Sounds like you enjoy the process of the learning.
Absolutely. Learning something new is addicting. It's the drug that keeps me engaged.
I totally understand.
Yeah. And I see it in our staff, for example, that they're never doing the same thing more than a couple of days at a time. Our quantities, our volumes for what we produce today are very low. We produce between 100 and maybe 150 watches a year, sort of at the maximum. And that means that every 2 or 3 days you switch tasks and you learn a different thing and you learn a different process. And these guys in our factory, in our workshop, not really a factory, but they love learning new things. So sort of to wrap up the journey up till today, between 2016 and today, we've really, really focused in on how do you make things? How do you make things well? And that's been our focus. And granted, you cannot approach something as complex as watchmaking without being so focused. You have to have a laser attitude towards making things right, because on one hand, you're making an incredibly, I don't think people understand, an incredibly demanding mechanical object. Something that has to, if you build a car, the performance of the car is almost masked to the end user. It's ambiguous. Yeah, it moves and you can drive quickly and drive slowly, and it has to sort of work, but you've got these service intervals. But a watch, the end user has a direct reading of the efficiency and the function of the watch. The time is the ultimate measuring device of the capability of the watch. So if your end user, so a client, for example, wears a watch and it's running 10 seconds fast or 10 seconds slow, they can see that. You're on display. You're laying prostrate in front of the entire world saying, well, this is me.
Because you have an iPhone next to you.
Exactly.
You have an iPhone next to you that's on the atomic clock. And
it would be like the equivalent for machinists listening to this podcast. It would be like if every single customer had the most accurate CMM waiting at the factory floor that you're sending your parts to. So every single feature that you've made on whatever you've made gets checked so thoroughly that you have no place to hide. And that's scary. That's a very scary thought. So the demands mechanically are extremely high. Another example, relating it back to cars, is it's as if you put your car in first gear and left it in first gear for 5 years at a time. That's the mechanical demand of a watch. It's constantly on and it's constantly wearing itself out. So you have no place to hide mechanically. If your watch does not perform.
Are you talking like manual transmission now? Or?
Yeah. That's what it would be.
Okay. I don't know how to drive the manual transmission, but
well,
I get what you're saying.
Good.
The first gear is very, it's difficult to keep it in first gear.
Yeah. Very challenging.
Impossible.
And then you've got this. So that's one facet, the mechanical demands of a watch. And the second facet is the aesthetic demands. The more expensive your watch becomes, the more perfect it has to become. There's no such thing as perfection, by the way. Let me just put it out there. There's just an attempt at perfection, a pursuit. It's a journey, and it's never a goal, because you can always get better. And watchmaking is very much like that. You are aiming for an extremely lofty goal. There are objective levels of quality, but you have to hit them, or else, all your components that you've made are there on someone's wrist, and they can pull out a loop or magnifying glass anytime they want and start inspecting the quality. And so we're talking about surface finishes, we're talking about construction, so aesthetic sort of like design elements. And so you have this marrying of these two concepts that are usually very, very far apart. Very rarely do you have high level mechanical demands and high level aesthetic demands combined into one component. And it's, maybe you have them on larger parts. Well, yeah, Ferrari. That's a perfect example, actually. It's a luxury good where someone's got really, really high expectations, and you have to meet them both mechanically and aesthetically. But in general engineering, it just doesn't happen that often. So to loop back, the one thing we learned was to achieve those two parallel goals at the same time, you must have laser focus on learning. You must be able to constantly evolve your manufacturing process, constantly be buying the next piece of equipment, the best CNC machines that you can to push yourselves to the highest level of capability. And right. We're trying to achieve that in Sydney, Australia.
Tell me about that. So I've seen some LinkedIn posts and I see photos. You have a Kern, which Josh Shapiro also had. You have a Citizen R04.
Yep.
Some people, those are, fantastic machines. You say, so some people would say, well, it's not totally about the machine. It's about the person who's running it.
Yes.
But you believe it's imperative to have the best.
I think it helps.
Which is subjective sometimes.
It is,
yeah, absolutely. Choose, but
I see it as a precision chain, and your chain is only as strong as the weakest link in the chain. It's an analogy that we've heard, a few times, sort of in our lives. With, you're the weakest link. That's something that's ingrained in my head. But your chain is only as strong as the weakest link. And so approaching this as a fresh green machinist wannabe in 2016, I recognized, or at least my dad recognized very early on, if your capital investment, you're putting your money down, $500,000, $1 million, you want to make sure that link where you're introducing the highest level of capital expenditure, you want to make sure that link is as strong as it can be. And I'm talking about machine tools, right? So if you successfully eliminate errors that are caused by machines, you can then totally focus on all the other links of that chain. Your temperature control.
That's true.
You can start talking about.
That makes total sense. Why did you? And now some of this stuff's subjective. Why Citizen versus Star, or something from Switzerland? This is partly personal preference. Did you? Yeah.
Well, it's a really good question, and specifically on our Citizen R04, it was the first machine we bought, and we were really naive. Again, we were like a month.
Describe to people who aren't that familiar with that machine. Describe what it. So it's 4mm.
Yep.
Give us like a brief description of it.
The Citizen R04 is a 4mm maximum diameter bar capacity machine. So it excels at making parts that are smaller than 4mm. And it's a very compact machine. It's quite small. The footprint is probably less than 1.5 square meters for the machine, and obviously the bar feeder is quite long. But it's designed for making pins and screws and other small cylindrical objects that often go into watchmaking. But you've got strong use within the medical sector, within sort of electronics for making connection pins for connectors.
Jewelry, maybe?
I can, yeah, probably some jewelry applications, but I'm not 100% sure on what they would be. But within the watchmaking sector, Citizen's very well regarded. Many of our suppliers that we were using between 2011 and 2016 and still use today use Citizens, especially the R04.
Well, and it's a watch company too.
Yeah,
so.
It is a watch company, exactly. So they started off making watches, and they made machines to help them make watches as well. We were extremely naive going into the purchasing of that machine. We were like 1 or 2 months out from thinking that there was a watchmaking machine. That was just a fresh realization.
You thought there was one machine that could make all the different parts on that machine?
Well, that was our assumption, almost going into that purchasing decision. Obviously, that was
like a
broken.
A 3D printer, or
yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
How could one machine make all the? I would have thought that would make no sense since you knew so much about the parts in the watch. How could you think that there'd be one machine that would do that?
That's a really good question, and I think it highlights our naivety. It highlights how little we knew about manufacturing and how much we knew about, watch repair and watch sort of making in quotation marks. And it highlights.
So did you train yourself on? You trained yourself on the Citizen? I mean, or
yes,
did Citizen came in and provide you training? That was how you
both.
learned?
Well, Citizen provided us training on how to use the machine, the basic functions, and we did a few turnkey parts as well. But we quickly realized that to become proficient at the machine, you had to spend some time. And in 2016, we tried to choose a machine that was going to allow us to do the most amount of parts, right? Obviously not the whole watch. At that time, we realized that. But we went to Stuttgart in Germany at the AMB fair in 2016.
Okay. Been there.
And yeah, fantastic fair. It's a bit smaller than something like EMO.
Or IMTS.
Or IMTS, yeah. It's maybe about half the size or 2/3 of the size. Anyway, we went to the fair.
It's more turning, I think, a little bit maybe.
I think so, yeah. I haven't been in a little while, but I think so.
So you went there and you discovered what?
Yeah, we went there and we discovered Citizen, and we said, oh, that's interesting. We also saw Tornos, we saw Tsugami, we saw all the other brands, and we saw Star. And for whatever reason, I still don't truly know to this day, but I think it may have been price oriented. We said, yeah, this is the machine. It had all the sample parts. That it had some watchmaking screws that were being run, had some like a watchmaking stem, which is another pretty fancy part to make. And we bought the machine on the show floor. That's how naive we were. We paid cash that day on the show floor. Like that never happened. It sounds maybe 30 years ago.
Sounds like you were really enthusiastic about it.
Very, very enthusiastic, but also very naive.
Wouldn't it have made more sense to buy one in Australia that you wouldn't have to ship across the ocean?
Yeah, well, exactly. Why didn't we do that? I don't know. We just didn't. And later, it would come to light that there's no support in Australia. Only very recently, in the last like 2 or 3 months, has Citizen been taken on by like a proper agent in Australia.
I thought that was one of the main reasons you chose it.
No, yeah, that's so crazy. Like we didn't have any local support for 6 years. It was the only R04 in the country. Still is the only R04. So, I mean, I guess this story, it's pretty emblematic of how naive we were. And we were right on that peak of the Dunning-Kruger effect. And I love that. I love that because without that sort of naivety, we would never have started. So it's this dual pull. On one side, you've got like knowledge holding you back. And then you've got ignorance, arrogance, and ego pushing you forward. And we're here
And
only
so what
because
was
of
the
both.
harder part? The harder part, what's the harder part? The creating the luxury and selling the watch, or actually making the damn thing? Both
Um,
super hard.
both are challenging. Both are challenging, but I would say from a technical perspective, and I'm a technical guy, uh, building a watch is much harder than building a brand. You have many, many brands out there that don't make anything. And we did that. We did that for 5 years where we didn't make anything. And
Yeah.
realistically, like objectively, when you look at it, it's very easy. It's very, very easy to go to all your suppliers and say, yep, I'm going to buy this, buy that, buy that. But to actually make something from design to raw material to manufacturing to finishing to assembly, that is a big, big challenge. And I would say, in my humble opinion, that is where substance and actual true value comes from. And that's a very, very big topic. What is value in a luxury goods world? But in my opinion, value comes from artisans. It comes from in what I like to call modern artisanal watchmaking, where people are actually making something.
Yeah. Wow. Because to me it seems like it's something that provides you purpose and pleasure and excitement. There's easier ways to produce something to make money, perhaps, than uh, a luxury watch. You you
Absolutely.
you you do it for more than one reason, because you do it because it makes sense that this is a passion.
For me, I wake up and I go to work, and it has never, ever felt like work. It's
Oh my
always
God,
felt
you're so
like
you're so blessed.
I'm the luckiest person on earth, and there's not a day where I am not grateful for that. And it's something. It's actually very challenging for me to grapple because I fell into this. I had no choice as well. I mean, this is the other facet of it. I'm a son of a third generation watchmaker. To think that I had the illusion of choice, I was predestined for this
You
in this
always have
family.
a choice.
Well, maybe, but it would have been catastrophic for our family if I chose else.
Do you
uh,
have a sibling?
no, well, I have a half sister that she's not involved in the family business, um, and and for me, I grapple with that every day because I've landed into something. Obviously, yes, there is choice with everything. I agree, but I've landed in this, and it feels like pleasure. It feels like fun, and it feels weird to be able to do this and exist in this world that's driven by money when my life, my day to day is passion filled. And then, I mean, that's the first facet of me personally in my vocation. And the second facet, which I find so fascinating, and I'm trying to wrap my head around over the last 7 years, is that there is an artistic, creative expression that I find that I can exhibit in my work, in my day-to-day work, that is fulfilling on an almost spiritual level. I'm creating something from nothing, and it's purely driven by some neurons that are firing off in my brain. And art, that's the pinnacle of self-actualization on Maslow's hierarchy. It's in my mind at least. Art is right up there with what your psyche, your soul wants to do. You're creatively uh,
I'm trying to
expressing.
remember what Maslow's hierarchy is.
Well, you have
that's
your
the what
needs.
the most important needs that we have in life, and then people put money too high on the hierarchy because that's just a means to an
Yeah,
end. And
yeah,
right, that's what it is, right?
yeah. So
Okay,
you've
I
got like
did
the
hear a
base of the
podcast
pyramid.
about it recently. I was trying.
The base
And
of the
art is to you the top, or is Maslow saying that art
for
is the
me,
top?
for me, I'm not going to pretend that it's for everyone else, but for me, like the artistic sort of actualization of this job is a treat of all treats. The fact that I can create art, and the fact that it can be worn on people's wrists, not just locked up in a gallery, is really, really special.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's true. All right, so you have the Citizen, and then you
Yes.
have some other toys.
Mm-hmm.
No, this is the heart of what we're talking about. I mean, I it's incredible, and I think, you know, I reflect on this stuff all the time. In our industry, um, so much of what people make, our customers as used machinery dealers, our listeners, you can look at it as a total commodity. You can look at it as this is a pin, whatever. But you can also, you can go deeper, and you can figure out what this goes into and the importance of it. And there are parts that are a lot easier to do that for than others. It's a lot easier if you know that this is going to go into a syringe that's going to vaccinate people who want to be vaccinated. Um, and, um, but your, what you're making takes that, in my opinion, to an even higher level. That said, some people might disagree. Some people might say, well, a watch, it's just sort of an elective thing. It's not an essential item. But either way, and the same thing with selling machines. Like for me, it's so easy to just get, all right, let's get one for this price, and we can flip it for X price. And you're not really thinking about what the heck it's making, or what it's doing for the economy, or the depth of it all. It seems like what's so cool about what you're doing is you're really feeling it. You're feeling that it's tangible. It's right in front of your eyes, this art, and it's going to be on people's wrists. So it's twofold. It's got utility, but more importantly, it's expression, it's jewelry. Are you yourself doing a lot of the designing?
Well, the design is a team effort between my father and I. I might come up with concepts, and he might come up with concepts or a direction, and we'll iterate together. Design is very challenging. It's not as difficult as this whole conversation we've been talking about manufacturing or elements of manufacturing, and I'm trying to explain how tough that's all been. Learning that design is the same challenge. It's just in a different sort of sphere, and making something that is pleasing and looks good, but also congruous with a brand identity, very, very challenging. And you see it in all types of design. Companies that start off often morph and shift and have different design languages as different people are designing.
Are the two things, though, diametrically the right word? Diametrically opposed, the technical, engineering of the part, and then the artistic design, or
It's a good question. I don't feel properly equipped to talk about design authoritatively, but my opinion in August
that's all we have.
2023, that's all we have, yeah. But my opinion as of today is that the best design that I've seen and that I've exhibited is design without constraint. So where you're not thinking about how something's made, or you're not thinking about how it's going to be scalable and all that. You just design it. And then however it gets made, that's how it gets made. Now, the caveat to that is that everything has a price. And if you design something that, especially engineering wise, that is impossible to manufacture, you're an idiot. You shouldn't have done that. So there's this feedback loop that you have to have. But the best creative ideas come from a restraint-free environment.
See, that's so interesting because I I've always thought of it as totally different than that. I've always thought of it as um, when you're trying to come up with a creative idea, say you want to write a book, write a write a blog post, it, or paint a picture. If you can do anything you want, then it's like hard to come up with something to do. You need some kind of framework, some kind of constraint to get this creative juice flowing. And I know you say that you don't have constraints. You have constraints. You have
Maybe
the
ones that I don't
constraints of
see.
this is going into a watch.
It's true. Yeah.
This is going into a watch. You're not like painting a canvas that, you know, but I see what you're saying. What you're my if I could summarize what you're saying is yes, you're thinking in the framework of a watch, but at when you're first coming up with the concept, don't limit yourself, don't edit yourself immediately. Let your mind run free, and then after that, make it work. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, absolutely. As of August 2023, ask me in a month and I might completely change my mind. But currently, that's because the reason why, and I'll tell you the backstory. I used to design from a place of uh, design for manufacturing, and that's probably because I was so obsessed with how things were made, and I still am today. But what that meant was that my language was always crippled. It was always handicapped by some process that I either didn't have or I wanted to use. And I found myself going down these really defined ruts, uh, which causes problems. It causes more problems than you might think. You can't develop design language, and you can't develop proper ideation in terms of artistic expression. And as soon as I lifted those restraints, and I said, you know what, I'll
Yes,
figure out how to make this when I get to that point. Suddenly, things started flowing a lot more easily, and
I get it. That makes
it's
total sense.
it's not defined. Again, I'm constantly designing. Like I spend maybe about 2 hours a week dedicated on the next projects. So it's sort of R&D, literal like design R&D, and
So
it's a skill.
before it was sort of it was almost utilitarian. It was like,
Yes,
how's this design going to fit with the way this works?
absolutely.
And I could see how that would definitely hold you back.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Moving from a utilitarian mindset is one of the key things that has happened in the last 6 years. Yeah.
So when you sit down to design something, what inspiration are you looking at other watches? Are you does it come from an amazing podcast you listen to? Is it called
Um,
Swarfcast?
well, it's a good question.
Instagram?
Instagram, yeah. Inspiration comes and goes like vapor in the sky. It's extremely transient, and you might never find inspiration in the same topic twice. I can give you some really concrete examples. Our most recent watch, it's called the Mark II, and it's a watch that we've sort of, I would say it's called an entry level watch, but it's a terrible term to use. It's really our flagship model. That watch was purely inspired by the natural landscape directly around us. We have the
Interesting.
beach
Do you
500
have that
meters.
watch with you?
Yeah, I do. So this is
All
the
right,
watch.
let's.
It's so challenging on webcam to show, but if someone goes to our Instagram, you'll recognize it almost instantly. And this
Okay.
watch, the beach is 500 meters away, and there are a lot of elements in the beach, around the beach, that inspired elements of this watch. So we developed. I mean, I can go into really concrete examples. There's a decorative pattern applied to the dial on this watch called guilloche pattern. Josh Shapiro is a master at guilloche, right, or engine turning, and we have a pattern that, maybe it's been done before, but we executed it from the inspiration gained by the waves on the beach, and we're calling this pattern curl curl waves. Curl curl is the beach that's 500 meters away.
Can you point to that on the face of the watch, or
I can try.
Or is that on the?
It's on the face of the watch, and it's right in the center. Wow. You can see it sort of reflecting around. And so that, and it's also on the case back, although that's actually a bit more challenging to see. Then, the hands of the watch that tell the time, as well as the individual indices, the sort of the hour markers, they have a decorative pattern applied to them that we invented in-house, but it's probably, hopefully never been done before. And we're calling that feathering. And it's a grinding pattern that evokes the forms of feathers, and the feathers of coastal birds on the northern beaches of Sydney. So things like that inform design. They're inspired elements. But on the other hand, the watch that I'm sort of working on in the back of my mind, which might come to existence in about 2 years' time. So it's not. This is a peek behind the curtain. You're seeing how the sausage is made in terms of design. I was having dinner with my wife 1 year ago, and we sat down in Manly Beach at a restaurant called Momo Bar. This is the first time I think I've even mentioned this, but we were sitting down at this restaurant, and I looked at this table. It was a beautiful table. It was a mosaic patterned table with all these intricate ceramic tiles on it. And I just took a photo. I said, this is perfect. I want this. I want this in my house. I don't like watch dials. They came to my mind later on, but I said, this is a beautiful pattern. It sat in my photo album for a year. And it was in the back of my head every now and then, every couple of months, I'd think, oh, that was a beautiful table. And this is, our local sort of, very close to where we live, our local sort of go-to restaurant. So every time I walked past it, I said, here's that beautiful table again. Just 3 weeks ago, I started the whole design process of turning that table, the mosaic table, into a watch dial. And I don't know, that's how the hell do you plan that? You can't just go around Manly Beach looking at tables and it will never happen again. So the common thread that I think happens in both of those stories of inspiration is that you have to actually open your mind. You have to allow your mind to be inspired. If I walked around thinking about CNC machines, I never would have seen that table. So,
no, that's what I talk about a lot on the podcast and when I'm interviewed is serendipity, which is what, and that's the key to the machinery business. You have to have your eyes open and be thinking about seeing that thing. If you just have tunnel vision and just being, thinking about the meal or whatever and not looking at the table, you're going to miss out.
Yeah, I agree.
So that's where a lot of your inspiration comes from. Have you hired designers in the past as well? Just like,
no, we've never had anyone external. Part of the reason is
you considered that.
Yes, but not. It's never actually gone past the thought of hiring someone. I don't think we're at the stage. Well, let me backtrack a bit. We're still figuring out production problems. Making 100 watches a year doesn't allow room for more design. Where our bottleneck is not creating new designs, it's creating new watches or creating more watches. And as soon as we figure that problem out, and it's we're on track for that. As soon as we figure out stable production, and as soon as we can expand our collection, our library of watches that we produce, then more design is welcome.
And you're making, I saw online, and this I think was an old article. It said you're making 85% of the watch. Are you making, is that what you're doing? Are you doing 100% now, or what is that? What are you doing?
So we have a few different models, and the Mark II that we just talked about. We use a Swiss movement there, and we make the dial, the hands, and some elements of the case. So that watch, we probably make 25% or 30% of that watch. The important
Swiss movement, meaning the movement comes from Switzerland.
That's right. We import that, and we use a very, very reliable, high quality movement. But then so that's the Mark II, and then the NH3, NH2, NH1, and then more recently the NH55, which is just about to come out at the end of this year. We're making about 85% of that watch. So we're making the case, the dial, the hands, so all the external visual elements, but we're also making them a very large proportion of the movement. So we're making the main plate.
Why not that last 15%? What's that?
Well, that is the question.
Is that coming?
No, I don't think so. And I don't think it's feasible. That 15%, it's also a very difficult number to actually quantify. I'm just saying it's 15%. You can measure it different ways. You can measure it by weight, and then it would be 1%, or you can measure it by, bill of materials, and it would be 15 roughly percent. But that includes jewels, springs, in our case, some of the escapement. So we're talking about the balance wheel, the pallets forks, the escape wheel, those sorts of components that are very challenging to make, very, very difficult to make in series as well, and the volumes that we would like between 25 and 100 pieces. And also they're reasonably off the shelf. So we can buy a jewel, for example, for like 2 Swiss franc. But for us to make a jewel might cost us thousands of dollars, and
Right. Doesn't make sense.
Doesn't make sense. It's like buying a bearing or making a bearing.
So these are commodity parts.
They are commodity parts. The hairspring, for example, is also an incredibly difficult thing to produce in small volumes. If you wanted to produce 100, you would have a very, very tough time producing. That in fact, the quality of the hairspring actually increases the more of them you produce, because you batch them. So you make 1 million, and then you sort the 1 million into different grades, and you choose the best grade. So
I understand. So you're making 100% of the stuff that's worth making.
That's a very good way of putting it. Well, I hate saying 100% of anything, but that's probably the best way of looking at it. All the parts that we can make, that are economically feasible to make, and the things that we're equipped to make, we're making. And that's that sort of top end range, what we're calling the NH series. So the NH55, for example, it's coming out in a small series of about 10 to 15 watches at the end of the year, and it's about 85% is made in-house in Australia.
And how much do those cost?
We don't have a price, which is a ridiculous thing. The backstory of that watch is that we entered it into a competition run by Louis Vuitton, and Louis Vuitton they organized a competition called the LV Watch Prize for Independent Watchmakers. And it's a worldwide competition where independent watchmakers, so people like Josh, for example, Shapiro, and myself, and any other watchmaker in the world that was not
How much
owned.
of the watch do you have to make? How much of the watch do you have to make yourself to be eligible?
I'm not sure. There was no concrete stipulation in the entrance requirements, but I think the only main stipulation was that your company could not be owned by someone else. So you had to be you. You couldn't be a representative of like a luxury conglomerate. So all these independent watchmakers entered their watches into the competition. The results of that competition are coming out in September for the top 20. And then the winner gets announced in January 2024. So we're waiting on the results of that competition.
And they sell your watch for like $500,000 or
Well, it's not an auction, it's just a competition. In fact, I mean, if you have 2 minutes, I'll explain the beauty of the competition, at least the way I've
Sure.
interpreted it.
Before you do that, I want
Uh-huh.
to know, are there any other people in Australia doing what you're doing, making the whole watch?
No, not really. I mean, there are a few people that are attempting it, and there are a few people that have made elements of watches, but not at the scale to what we're doing.
And
Where
same with the United States. Is there anybody in the United States? I mean, maybe Josh is doing a lot of it, but that is doing to the extent you're doing.
well, in the United States, you have more people. You have people like, I mean, I can give a bit of a list, and I'm sure I'll leave some people out, but Josh is doing a
That's
great job.
okay, but I mean, you're talking 10, 20.
Yeah, less than 10, I would say, probably less than 5 people, and that's a function of being very distant, very far away from the watchmaking centers of the world. Your Switzerland's,
Where are
your
the
Germany's,
centers of
your Japan,
Germany?
like those
France?
three. France, to a certain extent, it's definitely heavily influenced by Switzerland.
Right.
So
Right.
being far away geographically is a
What
big
about
limitation.
Asia?
In Japan, I mean, so China does have a heritage of watchmaking, but it's very focused on high volume, low price, and which is the complete opposite of what we're doing. Japan also has that history, but they've shifted in the last maybe 20 years, 15 to 20 years, into producing extremely high quality watches. So you can go and buy a $100,000 Japanese watch. That's not a problem at all, and that's not quite possible in China.
Why? Okay. Question. What is it? It's Mills. Mills. What? There's these $1 million watches in.
A Richard
I see
Mille.
the sign in Richard Mill. What's the? Why would you pay him? I know you could. Somebody would say, why would you pay $1,000 for a watch? But what's in this $1 million watch that they say, well, it's $1 million? Why? Is it encrusted with gold, or I don't know, or diamonds? I don't know anything about it. Are you familiar with them?
Yeah, no, I am very familiar, and I can give a very detailed answer. The only problem is you're asking the wrong person. I'm an extremely cynical person when it comes to our industry, and I'm incredibly technically minded. So my response is going to be so colored, and it's going to be so biased that it's probably not even worth uttering. I can still say it if you'd like me to say it, but
give me the 30-second.
Okay,
You can say it. Why not?
It costs $1 million because it costs $1 million. I think that's the quickest explanation.
Okay.
And someone will pay that because it's $1 million. So there's a if you want to read further about this sort of phenomenon, it's called a Veblen good, Veblin, and it's a strong, extremely strong signifier of ultra luxury. In the same way that
it's like American universities.
Yes, it's high level of restriction, so low, extremely low supply and very, very high demand, and it inverts where
like Louis Vuitton and yeah.
Well, it's similar to Louis Vuitton, but it's sort of turned up to the 10th level, 11th level, maybe even. This ultra luxury exists in this world because we have a huge wealth disparity. You have people that are multi-billionaires that $1 million watch feels emotionally and hurts financially as much as $1,000 watch. If they spend $1 million or $1,000, it doesn't matter for them. It's about the same. And that's where ultra luxury sort of steps in. I personally, and this is where I have to caveat,
kind of disgusting.
I don't see a reason for that to exist in our society. I don't think that's morally. I mean, this is why I don't even want to talk about. Who am I to morally?
Well, what about paying $100,000 for a watch? Some people would say that. you know?
Exactly. And that's where my perspective sort of shifts, where at $100,000, you can actually provide $100,000 of value. You can. And I see that there is a fine line as well, sort of how far beyond $100,000 is it still acceptable? And that's why it's so subjective. But at $100,000, you're not just buying the feeling. You're also buying value.
You're buying the labor.
You can, yes.
The craftsmanship, yeah. The art. That's it. No, I think you gave me the straight up answer. Let's just get a couple more questions because I got to get the hell out.
Sure.
Is there anything else that you feel passionate about that you want to tell the world about what you're doing and how you feel about watches and life and etc.?
We've touched on a lot of these broad concepts about life and more than I expected, actually. I do think there is, well, okay, let me backtrack. On my 26th birthday, 2 days ago, I was shopping on eBay just randomly, and I saw this machine called a Zeiss F25. In 2008, that machine was the most accurate CMM, micro CMM in the world. It was a 0.25 micron uncertainty machine. For those that know, that's an incredible number and something that's nigh unachievable. That machine, if you're listening...
That's a Zeiss.
A Zeiss.
Yeah.
Zeiss made this machine in very, very low quantities, and it was the most accurate thing that they made. And that machine was on eBay selling for parts. To me, that was the most depressing thing I've ever seen. And it was selling for about, I don't know, like 9,000 Australian dollars, like 6,000 US, somewhere in the US. And it highlighted to me the overruling, undeniable strength of entropy. Everything ends. Everything has a finite existence. Us, the most accurate CMM in the world, all my machines in the workshop, the watches that I make, ashes to ashes, dust to dust, right? On my 26th birthday, that's what I'm faced with. I went into an existential spiral, still pulling myself out of it. And maybe you're hearing hints of it through this podcast. But what that's left me with is an incredible appreciation for this present moment. How do you express gratefulness and an appreciation for your existence right now? Because that's all you have. And waiting till tomorrow to be thankful, I don't think that has a place in my life anymore. So that's what I'm passionate about right now.
Fun interview. I'm gonna check out your podcast very shortly, and give everybody another plug for your podcast, your company, etc., so people know where to find you.
My name is Josh Hacko. I'm the technical director of Nicholas Hacko Watchmaker. You can find us on nicholasHacko.com.au, and also the technical director of NH Micro. You can find us there on nhmicro.com. We have Instagrams for both of those companies where you can look at photos of the parts and watches we make. And our podcast the podcast that I run jointly with Adam Demuth is called the Precision Microcast, and you can find that wherever you get your podcasts.
Fantastic.